Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the Open D6 podcast, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Scott Palter, who unfortunately died back in February or back in 2020. Um, and we've got an article by Hobby Games, and it's with Peter Schweghofer.
You might recognize that name from many, many Star Wars articles. He sort of went off and he does a lot of his own game books. I think he also went on to work with Wizards of the Coast when they had the Star Wars license. I'm not exactly sure. But let's just jump right into the article. On Monday, February 17th, 2020, Daniel Scott Palter passed away. He was best known as the founder and owner of West End Games, yet also infamously known as the person who sent the company into bankruptcy, losing the license for what was the groundbreaking first Star Wars role-playing game. I'm sure some people, particularly those who lost jobs and opportunities with the company's bankruptcy, hated him and never forgave him for what he did to West End in those final days. Over the years, I've had to reconcile my feelings towards him. I have the natural animosity over West End Games' demise. But I also realize he provided me with an opportunity to have my dream job, working full-time as the designer and editor at a role-playing game company, and with the Star Wars franchise no less. Despite all the frustration and drama, they remain the most fulfilling, productive 5 years of my professional life.
Yeah, I mean, some people do have some, animosity towards the guy, but most people I've talked to are like, yeah, you can't always expect the genius who comes up with an idea or who really takes off with it to be a good businessman. That's often the creatives and the business people have to really work together to get something done. If you're trusting the creatives to just automatically, instinctively know business, you're in for a surprise.
Yeah, unfortunately for these guys, I was told a lot of the freelancers, they didn't get their final checks. But continuing on, company lore claims Scott founded West End with money from his family's shoe company so he could produce war games he wanted to play. Eventually, West End branched into role-playing games with hits like Ghostbusters, Paranoia, and Star Wars. Both companies moved from New York City to a warehouse with space in rural Honesdale, Pennsylvania. At the time, the Star Wars line had reached its peak and was considered by the sales staff a dead license, but new novels from Timothy Zahn, published by Bantam, invigorated the license, and new life surged into the game line. By the time I tried for a second time contacting West End to see if they had any editorial positions open, the company serendipitously was looking for an editor to start a new quarterly journal supporting the Star Wars game line.
Yeah, the it's uh, we've talked a little bit in other videos about the interconnectedness between that shoe company and the game company. And again, you really shouldn't uh, tie one company to the fate of another company because if the one company goes down, it often takes the other company with it. But back to your earlier comment about people getting not getting their final check. Now, doesn't the doesn't the owner of the license end up owning the debt as well? As I understand it, if you are a company, say West End Games, and you go out of business and have to sell to another company, that other company buys not just your assets, but also your debt.
Mm. It's not something I have a lot of experience with. It's possible that's true. It's also possible that since they were freelancers, they would submit their work and then they would get paid, and then that didn't happen. Probably there should be a contractual obligation, but it
Oh,
was the 90s and
yeah, and I'll bet
yeah.
that the contracts weren't all that like solid back in those days.
hmm So he probably would have just had to have paid off the regular employees, if anyone. But I'll read the next one. I first met Scott one day in late spring 1993 when I drove up to West End's offices in Honesdale for my job interview. I was one of the two candidates seeking to edit the Adventure Journal the company wanted to publish. I had already corresponded and talked with the head of the editorial department, but I also quickly met Rich Harwin, the enthusiastic production manager who somehow turned creative chaos into a schedule and tangible product. I later understood both were my advocates opposed to the other candidate. A hint at the shifting personality conflicts constantly churning within the company. They ushered me into the downstairs conference room to meet West End's owner and conduct the job interview. I walked into the conference room lined with boxes of high-end women's shoes to greet a fellow obese fellow with a friendly, if borderline maniacal smile on his face. He was quick to offer his hand and get down to business. We talked about my professional background, and I offered several copies of the weekly hometown newspaper I'd been editing for a year. He was nothing but pleasant through, though at times very blunt about what he expected. I had no impression how much he involved himself in the editorial department, though I could tell he wanted only the best for the Star Wars game line. At the time, the company's bread and butter. He then asked me about Star Wars, specifically how I thought the Galactic Empire functioned. I likened it to the Roman Empire, with a strong presence at the core, both outlying areas controlled by governors and connected by a network of hyperspace lanes that approximated roads. The farther one got from the core, the more lawless society became, with governors having greater independence from the central government. Little did I know, in that era before the interwebs enabled one to look up information about others so easily, that Scott loved ancient Roman history, one of many periods about which he was passionately knowledgeable. I later found out my answer to that question clinched the interview with Scott and won his approval.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like,
Mhm.
if you are, well, I mean, just from Palter's perspective, I would definitely lean more towards working with somebody with, my same interests.
Mhm.
And another thing, back in those days, they questions like how do you think the empire works hadn't been really established. Like they were still figuring out a lot of this, background lore out.
Mhm. This might have been what did it, in fact. That's what we know now, how the Empire works, is inherently tied to this interview.
Yeah,
Although
I know.
Scott was also a fan,
Yeah,
so
I
it's
know
possible.
a lot of the Star Wars role playing game really developed a lot of the lore of how this or that works.
Yeah. To the next one. Scott was not an easy master to serve. Most editorial staffers dreaded him trudging upstairs to meddle in their affairs, or worse yet, a summons to his cluttered office. He occasionally interjected his opinions and edicts on the Star Wars role-playing game line, sometimes reflecting his own views and urges, but mostly in an effort to please Lucasfilm and maintain the license. He often interfered with the production schedule according to his entrepreneurial and gamer hunches. I know we clashed at times about creative and editorial issues. I'm sure at the time these conflicts were frustrating, but I don't recall ever feeling they were malicious. Scott always had his reasons for everything, usually two reasons, as he'd say, lingering on the two. He preferred to influence the Shatter Zone game line where he could indulge in the edgier sci-fi subject matter inappropriate for Star Wars. The original artwork of the famous naked cannibal babe from one of the supplements adorned his office wall for a while.
Yeah, I've never played Shatterzone, but I have seen it. Yeah, that'd be one to really look into for a future video.
Yeah.
But yeah, Shatterzone was definitely a bit darker than Star Wars, and so it's often
Mhm.
harder to find players. So that's why I never got a chance.
Yeah. Yeah, thankfully the internet makes that slightly easier. But as you get more obscure, it's much harder. Thinking about this um, progression, Star Wars at that time was becoming larger and larger. You could think when in 1987, when they did get that license, it was really just on the back front of uh, everything that else was going on. People really didn't think about Star Wars at that time unless you were really into it. And over the course of those, 10 plus years, I think that working with them would have become more and more stressful as they really moved towards making the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, I could see that. The
Mhm.
and so right around the prequel trilogy, people were wondering, okay, does he still have it? George Lucas, that
Mhm.
is. Um, and there, a lot of people would say, well, absolutely not. But other people are like, oh, these are my favorite movies.
Yeah, yeah, for better or worse, Star Wars got big. But to the next. Despite his occasional meddling, Scott gave his creative employees a great deal of autonomy. He trusted our creative instincts, our dedication to the license on which we worked, our sense of what was right for our game line and the gamer audience. He was a businessman, of course, but also a war gamer and a fan with passions for various subjects. Although he sometimes indulged in Machiavellian machinations with the internal power struggles among creative egos, he stood up for his employees in conflicts with folks beyond the office walls. I recall one time a freelancer with a gripe called and complained to him directly. Scott told him he trusted his editor's decision and didn't think much of people who bypass the chain of command to get their way. On several occasions, freelancers threatened to sue me and the company, sometimes because I didn't accept their journal article proposal, more often because the company was terribly late paying them, and Scott always told us to send them to him. He'd handle those legal threats so we could continue focusing on our creative work.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's really good that he's sticking up for his employees, but on the other hand, not paying your freelancers, yeah, that's just a recipe for disaster.
Mhm.
You've got
Yeah,
you've got the core people that are actual employees that you know are they're making all the stuff, but if you don't pay the freelancers, you are just that's a money sink. You have to learn, hey, this is a thing I cannot afford to do.
yeah. We've
That's
all had a boss like Scott Palter. Good guy, a bad boss. Well,
a
with
good
some
guy.
exceptions.
It seems to be like I don't know, good in some areas, bad in others.
Hmm. Yeah. Scott had his eccentricities like most people, though perhaps a few more than most. His SUV sported distinctive Free Tibet and weird load bumper stickers. He once declared no Nazis in supplements for an entire year after the World of Indiana Jones game became well established, more because they seemed an ubiquitous plot crunch than anything else. He claimed he would crawl over a room of broken glass to obtain the barbed wire license, thinking he could sell tons of books with Pamela Anderson's photo on the cover. He was not above the human failings everyone occasionally experienced. He could be petty and vindictive when he felt he had cause, though I witnessed this rarely. I felt he sometimes used office politics to further his own aims or benefit his favorites. His blunt manner, wheeling and dealing, vehement opinions sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. His dislike for some people colored his judgment. All failings to which I dare say most of us have succumbed at one point or another. That said, he was not a bad person. I felt he was quite a decent fellow, though it was easy for those who worked for him to overlook that in what was often an adversarial relationship. I was privileged to experience occasional kindnesses from him when he felt they were reasonable.
That whole no Nazis in my books, that's kind of amusing. So, uh, in addition to his Star Wars work, he also wrote some novels after the fall of West End Games. And those were in the series The Reich Without Hitler. Hopefully, YouTube lets me use the word Hitler. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, we already said Nazis. I guess I shouldn't say it again. We will not say it again.
all right, but yeah, it's kind of a it's kind of a little bit odd that he would be against using them in a game, and it's like okay, from a modern perspective, I actually kind of like the idea of using them because it's a clear bad guys that do bad things. You know, why not?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things in those West End indie books. There's, I think it was, I'm not sure exactly what the title of it was. Oh, The Rising Sun. That's what it is. I actually own a physical copy, and it's about China, and one of the portions of this, uh, there's a full article in there about racism, and I think that they kind of want you to be accurate in that, which I think that a lot of RPGs have tried to move away from in more recent years.
Yeah, because okay, there are settings where yeah, it's a big part of history, but at the same time, do you really want to play that? Um, yeah, sure, it's more accurate, but it's less fun. I mean, you know, maybe you want to have a struggle to overthrow something, and that would be a good story. But if you had it just like the background radiation of your setting, I don't know. For me, that would be a bit of a slog.
Yeah, yeah, I can kind of see from a branding perspective, but yeah,
Yeah.
they definitely good thing they went back to it.
Also from a modern perspective, I'm just kind of amused that he was so interested in getting the barbed wire of all things license. I mean,
Yeah,
nowadays, if
he,
somebody were to talk, if someone were to say barbed wire, no one's going to think of that film.
yeah, yeah, I must have really liked Pam Anderson, but West End's bankruptcy devastated me. Scott called the editorial and art staff into his office and, once everyone had quieted down, simply announced, "Consider yourselves unemployed." Our parting from the company was characterized by bitter chaos and misunderstandings. Freelancers, including meagerly paid staffers who relied on freelance jobs to make ends meet, remained unpaid as the banks and big creditors fought over their share of the company's remaining assets. As the face of the company, Scott found himself in the middle of the turmoil, a more difficult position given his relationship with his family's shoe company. Never really hear about people. Well, I guess I could probably find something about Bucci Imports. I think that's what it's called. I wonder if there's any stories about people over there complaining about the game company, which was also operated under their umbrella.
Yeah, as I understand it, the shoe company benefited more from the relationship than the game company.
Hmm.
But that's it's I think that they probably had to have known that the company was, on shaky ground before the consider yourselves unemployed, because you had people calling, for, hey, I didn't get paid, all the
Hmm.
freelancers.
Yeah, yeah, that's a shame for them. Despite my misgivings, I worked with Scott 2 years later as the company passed through several corporate hands. I set my scruples aside in those desperate freelance days to work on the Meta Barons role-playing game. Not my finest work, but an opportunity Scott gave me. Not as life-changing as the first one, but a chance to keep earning money in the industry with an awkward trip to Paris to boot. Even then, his small kindnesses emerged, though usually in the interest of getting business done. Sending someone out to buy eye drops so I might survive a week of meetings in a smoky conference room. Requesting they ask the pizza parlor where they ordered lunch not to crack eggs to congeal over our pizza. And giving me a Saturday off to go sightseeing in Paris.
Yeah, okay. So Meta Barons is a game I've always wanted. Like, I saw it in the store and it was $50. And I'm like, ooh, that's just out of my price range back when it first came out. It's easily more than tripled in price now. You cannot get this game for a reasonable amount. It's
Mhm.
expensive, and it's a title that's actually rather popular in France. Way more popular in France than it is here.
Shout out to our French RPG players because there are quite a few of you.
Yeah, there's D6 actually kind of took off in a few different areas in France. Who knew? But
Yeah.
yeah, there's not just the Meta Barons game. There's a few others out there. Um, and for anyone that doesn't know, Meta Barons is it's a far future space opera, kind of in the same vein as Flash Gordon, Dune, Star Wars. Um, you got people, riding sky cycles, flying through, lots of action, and it's actually connected to the guy that made the failed Dune movie, not the one that's currently out, but the one that never truly got made. If you want to go on a trip, all those people who are listening out there, go look up the history of that movie.
Making of Dune documentary.
Yeah,
It's very, very intriguing. It really set a course for science fiction in those later years. You can see its influences across aliens and obviously the Metabarons. I've never seen the documentary, so maybe someone will be able to tell me.
and I
Uh,
oh, never mind. I was about to go on to a side topic about how raw eggs in the U.S. are less healthy than raw eggs in France.
oh, yes,
But
that
let's
is
not
important
go
to note.
down on that sidetrack. Let's stick back to the topic.
Yes. The last time I saw Scott was at Gen Con 2004. The last time I attended the burgeoning MegaCon. He was at the Final Sword booth, promoting his latest role-playing game products apart from West End. He was friendly and gracious, glad to meet my wife, and I like to think deep down inside, genuinely sorry for the way things fell out with West End. Some may blame West End's demise on Scott and the shoe company, But I often remind myself that without the shoe company, Scott never would have been able to establish West End Games in the first place.
Yeah, I guess that's fair because the shoe company did uh, foot him the initial money to get the
Hmm.
thing going.
Yeah. I don't expect everyone to agree with my assessment of Scott's character. These recollections reflect my own experiences and are no doubt tempered by time. My nostalgia, my naively, I don't know why I can't speak now. My naively forgiving nature, and my aim to remain relatively positive in my online presence. The past week, I've read various people's reaction to his passing. Many remembrances hail him for his work on the numerous game lines that made West End famous, and I'll admit, I read those and part of me cringes a little on behalf of the teams of designers, writers, and editors who made far greater contributions to those games, if they weren't in fact the impetus behind them. Yet Scott was the foundation supporting all those projects. At a time when one needed a vast corporate infrastructure to publish games, Scott set off with some of his family's shoe company fortune to establish West End, to enable game designers to make games he himself believed in and make money too. He provided a platform for a host of dedicated, amazingly creative people. He gave established and up-and-coming authors a chance to see their work in publication, and in some cases, launch careers in game design and publishing. He gave us full-time salaried jobs so we could do what we loved, work with licensed properties to which we were devoted, and produce game books with entertained gamers and delighted fans, which entertained gamers and delighted fans. Clear skies, Scott, wherever your spirit may fly. Thank you for all the opportunities you offered us. Sic transit mundus.
Yeah, and I think OpenD6 is kind of an interesting legacy because it allows more people to, continue on what he started. Yeah, sure, they can't continue on with the franchise licenses that he managed to get. I don't know how he managed to get
Mhm.
some of those, but it still lets people, keep his, creation alive.
Yeah. Today, if, Scott was starting out, he probably would have just posted all of this on RPG. Oh my God, what's it called?
RPG.net, drive through RPG.
Yeah, Drive Through RPG. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so
Wouldn't have gotten it.
actually, that's a whole other topic. We should talk about publishing, but yeah,
Mhm.
the publishing world is not the same thing now that it was in his day. Now, I can publish a book and have published books um, through Amazon, and the average person that goes through traditional publishing doesn't get paid much at all.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I had a more traditional publishing contract that I managed to weasel my way out of, and I'm so glad that I did. Because the you know the benefit for a traditional publisher is that they will give you um, editors, artists, and advertisers. I am terrible at advertising, but um, you know I'm they weren't going to give me an editor anytime that I was going to be able to edit. It wasn't any time in the near future. It was like over a year in the queue. And then artists, well, I know how to do my own art. So, you know, they were really offering me nothing. I thought they were going to do advertising, but then I found their advertising plan and I'm like, okay, now I've got to find a way out of this. But
Yeah.
yeah, then self-publishing came along and the profit margins are better. The the work hours or whatever you want to put in. You do have to do everything yourself, but you really have to do everything yourself with traditional publishing anyway. So you're not really gaining anything, and you are losing 90 to 95% of the potential profits. It's just insane. But anyway, yeah, if he had been putting things out today, oh yeah, he'd definitely be much better off.
Yeah. Yeah, he wouldn't. Well, there's, pros and cons to that. It wouldn't be Star Wars games. Well, they wouldn't be the way they are now.
Yeah, well,
But
if he, what I'm thinking is if he could still get the movie licenses.
Mhm.
Um, so there's take Gallant Knight Games for example. Gallant Knight Games has the ability to do Zorro, which is great, and then the Purgatory. They're coming up with a soon to be released um, Planet of the Apes D6 role playing game. So these movie licenses are still out there. People still want to, you know, use the D6 system for movie licenses. So it's still a world. I think that if Scott were still alive, he'd definitely be able to, grab the world and, you know, maybe hopefully he would have gotten somebody that could handle money a little bit better, but, that's up to luck more than anything, I suppose.
yeah, well, if there's anything more you have to say, I think that might be the end of this video.
Yep. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Roll a 6.
And don't roll a one. Later.